And fast forward a year from now, and instead of the BRIC economies, maybe we'll be talking about the BRICS economies. That would include Brazil, India, China, and perhaps South Africa. But before that can happen, there are some serious issues the country will need to tackle. And here to talk about those challenges, along with opportunities in South Africa, is Tendai Musikavanhu. Thank you so much for joining us. He is CEO of Old Mutual Global Index Trackers. Tendai oversees around $5 billion in emerging market-based investments, the majority of which are in South Africa. He's now joining us live from our Boston bureau. And Tendai, I know the weather which was much more severe there in Boston than it was here in the city, so I thank you for joining us this Friday.
Pleasure. Makes me miss African shores somewhat.
I bet it does. I've never been, but I'd like to go, at least for the winter. All right, let's get down to South Africa. You know, the South Africa's benchmark index is near a record high, and the question that many people are asking is, do the fundamentals, does the current state of the South African economy actually support where stocks are trading at the moment?
Yeah, I think South Africa is really on an upward trend with Africa's four most advanced economies, Morocco, Tunisia, and Egypt, where you've got the demographics working for it, you've got the manufacturing and service sectors of the economy booming. You've also got a new generation of leaders, whether it's the financial leaders or the Reserve Bank, for example, practicing austerity. Austerity is not really a new buzzword in South Africa, as they've been quite austere over the last decade.
Certainly the country seems to be stabilizing, but let's talk about some of the economic headwinds that you're facing at the moment. Unemployment is very difficult, running at around 25%, or a rate of more than 25% at the moment. And the rand, it has been a favorite of investors. I think it's up about 40% over the last year. But there's a lot of debate at the moment, very public debate, about whether the country should have a stronger or weaker currency. Now, the other issue is also that the government's talking about taking a bigger role in the country's economy. Some people saying nationalization would be a good thing for stocks, others saying that it wouldn't be. So address some of these issues.
It was just really a few years ago when Thabo Mbeki joked and said that the ANC were becoming Thatcherite. And I really don't see the ANC going back to the 70s and 80s that other countries experienced of nationalizing any sectors of the economy. What you're really dealing with in South Africa.
Just to give a little background, that is the ruling party at the moment, the African National Congress.
That's correct. That's correct. So what you really have in South Africa is a new class of people who are very business savvy and somewhat streetwise. And I think you're seeing that by the currency, as you said, appreciating. You've got a real interest rate there for prime borrowers in South Africa of 6.5%. You don't have that anywhere in the world right now, 6.5% real interest rates. And that's really what's buoying up the currency. It's what's making sure that they don't pander to a lot of populist pressure to reduce the very high unemployment rate. Talking about the unemployment rate, that unfortunately is a vestige of the past and may stay there for some time, considering that 90% of those people unemployed are typically semi-literate.
Now, let's go back to the rand for just a moment. There's a big public debate. The government obviously wants a stronger rand there, but yet many businesses within South Africa would like to see a weaker country to actually boost exports outside the country.
Yeah, I think the Reserve Bank governor and her team have been really on top of things. They're not really pandering to either the government on one side or the business community in the other. What they really see is their very dear inflation targeting policy that has been in place for the last probably 7 to 8 years. They target inflation between 3 to 6%. And that's really their goal right now. They believe that investors want predictability and stability, and so far they're right.
Now, precious metal is obviously important to the country in terms of exports, but let's talk about stocks and sectors. I know infrastructure is another area where a number of investors are somewhat optimistic, but what's your personal view?
Yeah, I think obviously being South Africa, not talking about the World Cup would be amiss. The fact that the World Cup was a success was really on the back of a very strong and very well organized team that put together all the various bits of what was necessary to make that a world-class event. So you've already had a lot of the infrastructure boom in South Africa. because of the high interest rates, you've got somewhat of a challenge with the South African property sector. The real sector that's booming right now in South Africa is really the automobile sector, as they continue to export a lot of the, these automobiles typically to Europe and the rest of the world.
Let me ask you a quick question, Tendai. We only have about 30 seconds here, but late last year you closed all 5 of your U.S.-based ETFs. Now, is it that we're not seeing a lot of, at least on the retail level, a lot of investor appetite for South African investments? Certainly on the commercial level we are. Walmart obviously making a big investment in a South African company earlier, late last year actually.
Yeah, our ETFs were global, so typically they were global in emerging market. They weren't South African ETFs. And we came to the conclusion that the ETF industry, unlike our traditional index tracking business, is really an oligopoly in that there are probably about 4 or 5 firms that really control that market. And we tried obviously to slash our prices, and we realized that this wasn't a game we wanted to play. We believe, though, that to continue to invest in emerging markets, frontier markets, and South Africa, indexation is the best way forward.
All right, Tendai, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday. Safe travels to you in Boston. Know the weather is quite bad here. That was Tendai Musikavanhu. He's in Boston. He's also the CEO of Old Mutual Global Index Trackers.